Hey there, so we're with Greg Pecora of Wops Hops, and they're the first brewery in Sanford, Florida.
That's right.
We're about 40 minutes outside of Orlando. How long has the brewery been open for?
We just celebrated our 3-year anniversary.
Fantastic. So I'd love to hear more about, I guess, the brewery and the history about the brewery. So opened about 3 years ago. I guess we can start off the path from the early on. So
Sure.
what got you into craft beer? I mean, everybody has that question, right? So.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun little tidbit. I was scuba diving in the island nation of Yap in Micronesia.
Okay.
So it's not too far from Guam.
Yeah.
And the hotel I was staying at had a microbrewery. It was actually cheaper for them to make their own beer than to import it.
Yeah, I imagine.
So come back from scuba diving, long day out in the water, and was wanting a beer, and the brewmaster was sitting at the end of the dock, and I grabbed a beer and sat down next to him, and I said, "Oh, I really like your beer, and I always wanted to brew beer." Well, he was an Austrian.
I was going to say, if he's an expat or where?
He was an Austrian gentleman.
That makes sense.
Little on the crabby side, but in his Austrian accent, he said, "If you can't handle water, grain, hops, and yeast, then you have no business brewing beer." Well, I said, "I think I can handle those ingredients. I'm pretty good in the kitchen."
Cool.
And he said, "Okay, well, let me show you my brewery." And he had a little 1.5 barrel system. It was immaculate. I was just shocked how clean everything was there, and kind of ran me through the process. Got home from the trip, and I ordered a really good homebrew kit and started brewing, and that was 2008.
2008. Also, actually, not that long ago.
Oh.
Yeah, some people start like really back in the 80s or 90s, but yeah, 2008. That was 9 years ago. So it's actually not that far along. I mean, so. How did that transition from, you started home brewing, I mean, you caught the bug as everybody ends up doing. And so how does that transition into eventually, obviously, opening this 3 years ago? I mean, I'd say that's a relatively short time, 6 years. Like, some people really go long before they end up doing anything with it.
I'm a little bit older than a lot of the young folks that, started off in college and stuff. I was working in law enforcement, and I was a law enforcement officer for 20 years, and that was kind of my release to brew beer, and I met really nice people and started brewing with other people and just enjoyed the community. And then got to the point in my law enforcement career that I was done. I did not want to do it anymore. And my wife encouraged me to open a brewery. She knew I had been talking about doing that for a few years, and I was an award-winning homebrewer and got a lot of attention locally here in the Central Florida area, and talked my best friend into going into business with me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I guess I think a lot of people would be more curious about that journey before reaching to the point of, okay, I'm at the point where I'm confident in my beer to open a brewery. What are some moments, like aha moments in that range of like you starting as a homebrew to thinking about opening a brewery? I guess commercial beers that you're inspired by, certain moments that are aha moments in process, your equipment or certain ingredients that you used, and then I guess moving on also just like talk more about the community and like how you were involved, and obviously you entered yourself into competition. So like, I mean, I guess it's a multifaceted question, but I guess I'll start off with like, what's a commercial beer that inspires you?
Well, I was at a young age. My family introduced me to Ballantine Ale, which was basically only found in the New York tri-state area, and didn't understand what an ale was, and really enjoyed the flavor and texture of this beer. And then as a home brewer, of course, you start getting into these imperials and Railbender is a beer that I really liked as a Scottish ale. As a McEwan's was a Scottish ale that I really enjoyed. So immediately I started brewing Scottish ales.
Okay.
I preferred maltier over hoppier. And actually, when I first started homebrewing, I was not a fan of IPAs. And over time developed and understood the flavor profiles and then learned to really enjoy them. So then I started gradually doing, the hoppier stuff, the pale ales, and then all of a sudden I found those proper hops for IPAs and was blown away by how many different flavors I could get out of the hops, and that's where I learned how to individualize each hop variety and understand. Some of it, if I wanted piney, or if I wanted earthy, or if I wanted more citrus, if I wanted melon, and through experimentation, just found that if I crossed those varieties too much, it really muddled the beer. It made it difficult to enjoy, and then over time understood the balance of the varieties.
That sort of answers the second question for me. So I guess your transition from starting with malty beers and then realizing, gaining a palate for hoppy, and then understanding hops more and more, and then changing your brewing process to that desire to produce hoppy beers. And then so I guess another question a lot of people would have was about the community. So obviously you enter yourself into competitions, and I'd say a lot of people, homebrewing is not just an individualistic kind of pursuit. It involves a lot of collaboration, sharing ideas, learning from each other. So do you want to expound upon what that journey was like for you?
Sure.
How many people have you become friends with, and what was it like competing in competition with your homebrews?
So immediately I started asking questions of other homebrewers, and when I visited breweries, I was like, well, how do I get started? And every time they said join a homebrew club. So I found a couple of local homebrew clubs, started attending meetings, and immediately when I walked through the door, it was very welcoming. It was, hi, how you doing? Here's my beer. And coming from law enforcement, where I was constantly surrounded by negativity, the craft beer industry is all very positive. And so for me, it was initially I was kind of standoffish because in my training you keep people away.
Okay.
So coming into the craft beer industry, I had to let my guard down. And as soon as I did that, I realized just how open and how kind people were. Everyone's willing to share not only their creations but their ideas.
Yeah.
And I was blown away by the kindness of the community. And immediately I felt like, okay, this is for me.
That's awesome.
Because usually people in the craft industry have a good, strong work ethic. There's an education. And I'm not saying college, but it's just an education of a knowledge of chemistry and biology, microbiology, physics, and I was always very good at that in school, but I'm also a really good cook, so it combined those things that I enjoyed doing and added not only the artistic side of craft brewing, but the scientific as well. Mm-hmm. So it was fun to balance the two of them. And always asking questions, and then as my knowledge base grew, people were coming to me to ask questions. So it was that pay it forward kind of feel. Mm-hmm. And so in home brewing, and then starting to compete and doing beer festivals and getting that immediate feedback from people, either they didn't care for what you were doing and you didn't do that again, or they were like, wow, this is really good, why are you not bottling this, or do you work for a brewery? And it's like, no, I made this in my kitchen. Yeah. And over time local bars and restaurants would come taste the beer and say, hey, can you make this here at my restaurant? Can I sell this in my tap room or my bar? Mm-hmm. And of course, you know, the legal aspects we had to work through, but eventually, you know, I started brewing for my friend's Italian restaurant. I had 2 of my beers on tap, and I worked with the owner and the chef on making the proper beer for his food. And then we started doing beer and food pairing dinners, mm-hmm. and had a lot of success with that. It was again that immediate gratification of people liking what I was doing. Yeah. So I was hooked. That was it. It quickly became, I want to make this hobby into my career.
Sure. So I guess like what people would want to do if they're home brewers would be obviously join a homebrew club, collaborate with people, constantly improve your product, and then finally get to a place where people are asking for it, right? Not you're getting that feedback of like, oh, I'm just brewing beer. Now it's to a point where there's demand for it. Let me do something more with that, right?
And absolutely correct. And I would also add to that is, as a home brewer, even if you go into the professional side of brewing, do not have an ego.
Okay.
Ego would get you in big trouble because when you're not a brewmaster, I don't even call myself a brewmaster. I own a brewery. I'm the head brewer, and I have a brew team, and we all work and collaborate together. And if you have an ego, you'll never learn.
Sure.
And you won't learn from other people.
Okay.
Because you'll block them. Your ego will get in the way of that. So be open not only to criticism, but open to other ideas and willing to experiment.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And then I guess that's the homebrewing side. I guess the other question is then more the business side. It's a big difference of, oh, I'm just going to brew beer to I'm going to open something. It's an establishment, the legal side. So obviously there's so much to say about it, but for egos, for the homebrewing thing, what would be some advice and some tips that you learned on the way of, you know, opening a business and opening a brewery? I mean, what's something that...
Firstly, I would say that not having an ego into professional brewing also helps as well. The reality of owning a brewery is that you don't get to brew beer very often. In the beginning I did, but immediately I realized that owning a business, if you're not running the business, then the business will run you.
Yeah. And
so my advice to people would be, if you want to brew beer, go to a good institute, get the technical degrees, or intern and work your way into a brewery situation for pay and learn from the brewers around you. On-the-job training is something that's very doable in the brewing industry. Yeah. You don't necessarily have to have a degree, but that willingness to learn and constantly challenge yourself as a person working in a brewery. Now, owning a brewery is again completely different. It's a completely different monkey. It's I spend more time doing paperwork and paying bills and dealing with government agencies and taxing and event coordinating.
Staff management.
Yes, staff management. I never wanted to own a restaurant. When we opened a brewery, it was just the brewery. The space that was next door to us and attached in the same building had a restaurant. And when they went out of business, we quickly realized that we needed to have food, which kept people in the brewery longer. So instead of someone coming in for 2 beers, they now stay for 3 beers and a full meal, and they invite their friends and they stay longer, and that $16 bill quickly goes up to a $30 and $40 bill. So the economics of the business, it was quite obvious that having food and owning a restaurant was necessary. Didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Never thought I was going to ever own a restaurant, but when the idea presented itself to me, it was a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
And flexibility is an important aspect of the brewing industry. You have to be flexible because what you think is working may not be working. And again, that's where the ego comes in. It's like, okay, well, my idea sucked, and it's time for me to rethink it or listen to that other person saying, hey, you might want to try this instead.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, obviously this means a lot to people that are trying to get into this. There's the brewing side of it. If you know, that's the glamorous maybe. Granted, a lot of it, you know, I've heard the stories. It's a lot of it's just cleaning, right? Like it's not as glamorous as a job as many people might think it is. And then the other side of it is, you know, if you're going to open a business, you're going to be opening a business, and you're now doing the business side of it. Again, not quote unquote as glamorous as I'm making beer and doing all these like artistic things that I thought of when I was homebrewing, right? It's
absolutely. Yeah. And where I think the glamour comes into brewing is all the events, all the festivals, all the community interaction. When there's a big event in our town of Sanford, they come to us and say, hey, can you provide beer for this? People are coming up to me going, oh my gosh, you made this? And that's where the glamour comes into.
No,
so that's the payoff. Yeah, you know, there's a lot of cleaning involved, but there's a payoff to it,
it's satisfying, for sure.
Yeah. So it's nicely balanced.
Yeah. So I guess the final question would be more about the beer. What would you generally describe the profile of what you have brewed at the tap room, and also what is the beer that you're most proud about, and let everybody know about it?
Initially, I prefer English style ales. So initially, we had a lot of English-based beers. You know, the Scottish ale, porter, stout, maltier side, ESB, stuff like that. But I quickly realized that as a small brewery with a tasting room, we had to brew many different styles of beer because the people who are coming into the brewery, especially people new to craft beer, we had to give them something to get them to stay.
Sure.
So the light lagers, the cream ales, the fruity beers, and from there you develop their palate. So, you know, they'll come in starting to drink that light lager, and then, you know, 4 or 5 months and with our customers coming back, they're now drinking porters and stouts and IPAs, and so that's the fun part of it. But for us, when I needed to hire a brew team, I got the interest of my brewers and in the styles that I like, but then quickly they were like, hey, can we try this beer?
Okay.
And again, there's the ego thing. I could have been egotistical and say, no, these are my beers, and you're gonna.
Yeah.
But I said, no, let's have fun with this.
Yeah, sure.
And encouraging them to write their own recipes, and then brewing those recipes, and then seeing the reaction of our customers. So now we have German style box. We have wheats. We're talking about doing a Hefeweizen, which is a style of beer that I don't like.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And but you know, my brew team wants to make it, and,
Sure.
and again, it's about the customer, not about what I like.
Yeah.
So for a small brewery with a tap room, having that buffet of beers is important for our customer base.
Yeah, so it's like 16 beers on right now, something like that. So it's a collaborative process. It's listening to your team, and then just also brewing to what the community wants. But also, interestingly enough, as a new brewery, you're growing the palette of the market that you have.
Right.
Starting off differently. Now you can expand a little bit more and like test people's palates a little bit more, be a little bit more challenging and experimental. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, and what you have to realize is you have to realize the region that you're in. Now, obviously, if you're in Northern California, Oregon, Colorado, New York, the places where there are a lot of craft beer drinkers, then you base your beers to that customer base because they're more educated. They have a more educated palate. Here in Florida, the craft beer industry is very new, and I would say we're probably 15 years behind Denver and Portland.
Yeah, for sure. San Diego.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's fun to be part of the beer renaissance here in Florida, and realizing that the Florida beer drinker is used to a very light, very overcarbonated, put a lime in it kind of beer. And so that's been challenging, but it's been a fun challenge because when that beer drinker realizes that there's other flavors and they like it, and we just snagged them in our fishing line and we reel them in, and they're educated now. So now they want to travel to locations like Denver and San Diego and stuff and experience that the explosion of flavors that is available to them.
Yeah, and it's viral in the sense that they spread it around to their families, their friends, and all of a sudden everybody's now like interested in craft beer. So last question: what is the beer that you're most proud of that you have available now, or that you've been, maybe it's all the way in the past, or what Wops does now? Like, what are you, inspired to do more of?
It's a really good question, but it's also a hard question to answer.
It's like choosing your favorite kid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which child's my favorite?
Yeah.
But for me, I enjoy being surprised.
Sure.
So we went to the Great American Beer Festival in Denver this past month, and I realized that even though I was brewing several different styles of beer, I was still pigeonholing myself.
Sure.
So immediately we came back, the brew team came back, and we discussed styles of beers that we wanted to make and corrections to our current beers. And we brewed our first Bock. We're brewing some Belgian styles. So what I'm most proud of, I think, is my sweet potato ale.
Okay.
And you had it the other day on draft, and so that's the beer that kind of put me on the craft beer map in Central Florida. I have a lot of people who will come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the guy that makes that sweet potato beer."
Right.
And so I took a seasonal style, which
tell
was
some
pumpkin.
specs and okay, cool.
And growing up here in the South, I always enjoyed sweet potato pie over pumpkin pie.
Yeah.
So when everyone was making pumpkin beers, I decided I was going to do sweet potato, and it was fun to make. It was challenging. It was a lot of potato peeling.
Yeah.
But the reward from all that work, when that person's sitting in front of you and drinking a beer, going, "Oh my God, I can't believe that I'm really loving this. I'm not a big sweet potato fan, but this beer is fantastic." And so yeah, that's. I think that'll forever be the beer that I'm most proud of, because that's the beer that kind of kicked me into the movement.
Yeah. So it's a sweet potato ale, so not too far off from pumpkin, I guess, but then just with similar spicing, or what makes yours a little bit more unique, or what you enjoy about that recipe specifically?
So a friend of mine, her mom always made sweet potato pies for the office. We could purchase them and bring them to Thanksgiving dinners elsewhere. And so I asked this woman, I said, "Okay, tell me how to make a sweet potato pie."
Yeah, absolutely.
And she wrote the recipe for me, and I'm looking at the recipe and I'm going, well, everything in here can go into a beer.
Yeah.
Cinnamon, vanilla, brown sugar, nutmeg,
There you
allspice, and these are flavors that have already been used in Belgian styles, and of course the pumpkin beer.
Very similar.
Yeah. So what I like about my sweet potato ale in all beers that I like to make is the subtlety of flavors.
Sure.
So for me, it still has to taste like beer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
and how often have you drank a beer and you were like, I just taste nothing but blueberry, or there's nothing
Yeah,
but
okay. Yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
cinnamon.
Or like
So,
too much overspice.
yeah, so for me, the balance of the spices with the flavor, and then again, it's still a very drinkable ale.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm really proud of, is that at the end of the process, I still have a very strong beer to sit down and enjoy.
Awesome.
Yeah. We call it Thanksgiving in a bottle.
Yeah, I'm sure if people, it's time next week, they'll get some of that and enjoy it at home. So, well, thank you so much, Greg.
I appreciate your time,
thank
Darwin.
you. Come down to Wops Hops in Sanford, Florida. Until next time, cheers. Later.
Thank you.